shouldn't that beauty be made available to uplift everybody else? We can feel that tension as Michelangelo makes things 100 times harder for himself.
Should workplaces be beautiful, and how might beauty surrounding us really help inspire us to do better work?
It's a super interesting question.
Can beauty transform leadership? Today, Stephen sits down with Vatican Museums consultant and art historian Liz Lev to find out. Welcome to the 11 Talents Podcast.
Liz Lev, thank you for being on the 11 Talents Podcast with me. You know, I want to start with your background. You started in Rome 40 years ago, just as a student, right? Tell me a little bit about how you ended up in Rome. Well, I guess that would be the best.
Dishonorum.
Yeah.
The progress with which my career was made has very little rhyme or reason to it. I am a wonderful example of providence that just swoops in, or in the secular world, you just call it swinging from vines. I went to University of Chicago and I did art history. That was, I think, perhaps the one thing I was certain of. I really did love art, and I loved studying the history of art. And that's kind of been a lodestar for me always. Yeah. I went to, so after the University of Chicago and studying Renaissance art, I learned Italian because I didn't, you'll find this hard to believe, but I didn't want to take other people's word for what Michelangelo had said, and I thought it'd probably be helpful if I could read it on my own. So I know you'd probably find that's not in my character at all. And so I started taking Italian so I could read the sources on my own. It went so well that a professor suggested that I might want to take advantage of a program that did courses at the University of Bologna. And this is there was a full immersion. You just went to the University of Bologna, and a town which, way back in 1980, there was no English. I mean, there were huge chunks of time when I didn't speak any English. And so I went to this university, which was just incredibly illuminating. Just the way they studied art was so different from the way we did it at University of Chicago, that when I went back and really found myself at loggerheads with the art department of the University of Chicago, when I finished my degree and it was time to think about graduate school, I thought, well, I'd love to go to New York and be at Columbia and be like a cool contemporary art person and wear weird clothes and go to parties. Or, I could go to the University of Bologna because that worked out really well. So I'll just apply only to Columbia. And if I don't get to Columbia, I'll go to the University of Bologna. So there we go, which is it literally, again, God saving me from myself. You meant me, Columbia, that would have, yikes. But I think there is a little something in the rest of the story that conflict between the University of Bologna and the University of Chicago was about. The University of Chicago is what we would describe as a very formal school. So you look at a work of art and you're really only interested in the form, the exterior presentation of the work of art. The Bologna school was much more interested in what the wine world would call the terroir, and the soil that produces the art. So in order to understand the work of art, you had to learn about where the work and how the work was produced. Now, that's lovely if you're looking at Impressionism, like, oh, here we are in the late 19th century and we're developing oil painting and everybody's having fun. But if you apply that particular mentality to religious art, and you start getting into the weeds of religious art, then this whole new world started to open up where you looked at a painting and you put on this kind of really cool lens. It's like when the eye doctor puts the right lens on your eyes and you're like, oh, wait, I had no idea you could actually read that bottom line. Well, that's what happened. So suddenly with this lens that the University of Chicago, the University of Bologna put on my eyes, the faith element of the art, it all made sense, and it just made the works come alive to me. It made them real. It made them have meaning. And so I went back to do my graduate work. They assigned me a topic in Rome, and I went to Rome working on a counter-reformation. So a counter-reformation church, which means every minute of every day is Catholic apologetics, and just got so immersed in it that I returned to my faith, and the rest is pretty much history. So it's actually how one of my books, the How Catholic Art Saved the Faith. It's basically that. It's my training at University of Bologna kind of made into something that tries to show the steps that helped me see.
Yeah. What's your advice to especially Americans who have such a narrow view of what art and sculpture is, especially if we haven't left the United States? Our culture, it's 250 years this year. The U.S., obviously the founding goes back, but how do you get people to really embrace the art of the European art that goes, 2,000 plus years back and really appreciate it in the way that you do?
I was actually thinking when we were first starting this and we were talking about where do we start? I'm like, well, the obvious question is like, what do businessmen care about? These sort of things. Well, the fact is we wouldn't have these things if it weren't for businessmen who cared about these. So we have on one hand, a legacy of the Catholic Church that will produce and commission works of art. But we also have an incredible legacy of very successful businessmen who, as part of their bettering of society, was to commission works of art. Now, works of art do several different things. One of them is it's a form of communication. So here are a group of successful businessmen in Florence. They have different activities, but they really, really want to be thankful for the amazing things they have, and they want to be a leaven in society. And they do all sorts of very important practical things. They have dowries for poor girls, and they make orphanages, and they are involved with all of these charitable works. But they also want to do something that just leavens the society through beauty, because there really was a sense of, if they enjoy beautiful things, look at the houses of these Florentine houses, they enjoy beautiful things. Well, shouldn't that beauty be made available to uplift everybody else? So on one hand, you have beauty, which is, you have art, which is a form of communication. So they can help spread the gospel message by commissioning works of art that are going to go into churches, or they're even out in very public places. But they make present the saints, they make present the stories of salvation. The other thing they do is they produce a sense of putting forward a face of beauty in difficult times. These people are, very often in sort of tricky situations, political machinations, and not to mention a fair amount of assassinations and exiles that take place in this Renaissance period. But instead of dwelling on that, a lot of these men, and later on women too, a lot of these men will put forth the ideal face. Like, this is who we want to be. So the idea of beauty and harmony and order and putting that into the public square is a way of elevating people to, this is, we are meant to be better than we are. And I think this is something that we can carry on even today in commissioning and sponsoring and assisting a communication, artistic communication. It doesn't always have to be painting and sculpture, but when we think about communication, sort of think about it more artistically. How do we put forward a message that we have, beautified and given order so that it uplifts people? And my favorite example is Cosimo the Elder de' Medici. So the famous family that everybody knows.
Medici family,
It's famously synonymous with more money than you know what to do with. Cosimo earns the envy of the fellow citizens because he's so wildly successful. And because politics are easily manipulable, he is exiled from the city. When they exile him, they destroy his house and they, savage everything. But as things happen, the politics turn, and next thing you know, he's swept back in. The people of Florence go get him, and they bring him back in with his new mandate. And everybody's nervous because now here he is, this man who's been seriously maltreated, and he's coming back. And he starts commissioning such beautiful, gentle works of art that are about serenity and about compassion. And I really think, it's one of the things I think that's not really properly explored in his life, that was really a politic of beauty. And that what he was going to tell the Florentine people is, I think in particular the David that was made for him by Donatello, I'm not coming back to, lay waste about me. I'm coming back, I'm going to win you over. and I'm going to make you love me through beauty, through art. So later on, Julius II will do the same thing in the Vatican. Julius II, who becomes Pope in 1503. I don't really think he has a spiritual bone in his body, but he is Pope. So what can I do? Because I'm obviously probably not equipped to write an encyclical. So instead, he commissions, Raphael to paint the Stanza della Segnatura, Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Bramante to build the new St. Peter's. So for a man who, didn't know much about art and didn't know much about spirituality, he helped the people who did, got out of their way. And that is one of the greatest investments the Vatican ever made. It keeps the boat afloat today.
Yeah. Well, I think oftentimes we think about art and the beauty of the church as the church's responsibility. But with what you just said, I mean, this really stemmed from lay people, businessmen and women later on, who really supported and began this renaissance of beautiful artwork and culture that told the story of creation of the church. And I not to paraphrase Pope Benedict, I won't do it perfectly, but I mean, he talked a little bit about the best defense of Christianity or explanation of Christianity were the saints, and then secondly, artwork. Or the art of the church.
Saints and the beauty of our art are the greatest apologetic for the church. Absolutely. Yeah. Very, very, very powerful. Human witness. And in both cases, we really are dealing with human witness. My mother, Mary Ann Glendon, who you guys have been so wonderfully kind to through the years, she talks a lot about the role of the laity. I mean, that's what the Second Vatican Council was about. That's what Legatus is about. That's what Tom Monaghan did when he created this. It is time for the laity to pick up and do things. And by the way, this is something the laity is known for quite some time. And we've had this great, I think maybe the 18th and 19th century kind of slipped into a kind of clericalism that needed that revitalizing with the Second Vatican Council. But in the Republic of Florence and even really in Rome, there's a beautiful sort of collaboration between lay people and the church where the lay people take on their responsibilities, the churchmen take on their responsibilities, and they work together to really evangelize and to be a leaven in the society.
Yeah. So you were thrown into the forefront in the 2000s with the publication of a book and subsequently a movie by Dan Brown, who it's a love-hate relationship, right? Because
no, it's not. There's not a lot of love there.
There's not a lot of love. I think the biggest misrepresentations is obviously the Last Supper. Talk a little bit about that.
So I'm actually going to back up a little bit further because I actually, for the very first time in my life, 10 days ago, met Mel Gibson.
Oh.
And I met Mel Gibson, and the very first thing I said was, "You started my writing career." Because I actually started writing over another movie, which was The Passion. Uh-huh. And when The Passion first came out, even among Catholics, there was a lot of division about what is this appropriate? Is it not? Is it,
too graphic or not?
Porn? Yeah. I have very strong feelings on the subject. And when I read a lot of the pundits explaining the art of Mel Gibson, because it's a movie, it's an art form, I was reading the stuff that they were writing, and I was thinking to myself, I have seen every movie that Mel Gibson has ever made about 5 times each, including Tim, which I bet none of you even know.
No.
And maybe don't watch it. But I've seen them. I'm Man Without a Face. I've seen them all. I had quite the obsession. And so if there's anybody who actually knows, I know his body of work the same way I know Michelangelo's body of work. So when I'm listening to these people saying something, I'm like, that's not what this is about. You don't understand where he's coming from. And I think my very first article was the ultimate hero film. So we go back to the Spider-Man Marvel thing. I love this kind of stuff. So I wrote this article about Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, the ultimate hero film. And suddenly I started getting all this pushback and people wanting to argue with me about it. And you know me.
Not going to back down.
it's like you want to what? And so it kind of created a little bit of, I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of this. In the meantime, I was still doing a lot of tours at the Vatican. I still do. But I get a, so I sort of become the go-to person for apologetics for this kind of issue. So out comes the Da Vinci Code, and people say, what about it? And I have another very important memory, I think, and I think it's an important memory. I was teaching at another university at the time, and I was sitting in the staff room with my fellow art historians. We had an art history department, so I had a whole bunch of art historians in the room. We would prepare our slides. Yes, this is back in the day when we had slides. We prepare our slides. We all sat in the same room together, and we used to chit-chat. And we started talking about this movie. We all know that the book and the story is ridiculous. Like, we all know it's wrong for a million reasons in the history of art. And finally I said, well, wouldn't it make sense for one of us to just, say something? And I remember my chair of my department said, well, if people are too stupid to understand that, then what are we to do? And I thought, well, we're teachers, so we could try teaching. So I started writing on this Da Vinci Code. The next thing you know, the bishop said, would you put something up? And then Opus Dei calls me. And so, I mean, it's really just the willingness to just say this is wrong. Yeah. And so that grew and grew and grew. And then a little while later, I get a call that there's a group of movie people who really, really, really want to go to the Vatican after hours. Can I help? Can I take them? And out of a van several vans come Ron Howard, but not with like family, just a whole bunch of movie people. I can spot them across the room, movie people when they're in a group. They're just starting this tour, and we're doing this tour. I think I spent most of the tour making fun of angels and demons. So I would sort of point out, there are some people who mistakenly think this, but this is indeed And when we finally got to the Stanza della Segnatura, in front of the image of the Disputa, Ron Howard, with the adorable twinkle in his eye, which is a characteristic, looks over and says, "Hey, Liz, is this a woman?" And everybody laughs, and it just turns into this very, very fun day. At the end, a little while later, they called me up and they said, well, I don't know if you know this, we're making a movie. And I was like, hadn't figured that one out. And we'd like you to consult. I was like, me? You want me to consult? And they had seen it. It turns out someone who worked for them went to high school with me or college with me and showed them all of my anti-Da Vinci Code stuff. They wanted me anyway. Yeah. And I worked very closely with them for the duration of the filming, which was extensive. That was back when
which was the sequel, the Angels and Demons.
Angels and Demons sequel. I remember I took them to see the Swiss Guard several times over, and I just remember being aware of the fact that Ron Howard was so impressed with the loyalty. Like, just let the guys talk. Just the Swiss Guards spoke and said, yes, we would die for the Pope. We would do it again. We're so proud to be here. No, we don't think the uniforms are silly. We are proud to be able to be seen. I mean, and you could just see, you could see the Dan Brown story leaving his mind and this whole other story. He had to film the book.
We go back to those optical lenses that you talked about.
Exactly. It was like this lens of like the ridiculous pseudo science versus faith nonsense was disappearing. And he was much more interested in this. And I can see that in the movie. And I think actually people do see it in the movie. It feels a lot more like a travelogue with like a little bit of like, we got to pay attention to the story in it. And that really was the beauty of the art on a man who is sensitive to beauty and has a great sense of storytelling. It's exactly what Benedict said. It was the beauty of the art and it was the lives of these saints. But we took him down to the Scavi. But also the lives of these young men, the witness of these young men of the Swiss Guard who were so willing to give their lives, and it really it changed him. I think my favorite part of that whole experience, and there were a lot of wonderful things that happened and kind of cool Hollywood stuff, but my favorite part of the whole experience is that at the very end of the filming, right before the wrap, all of the department heads of the production they brought their families over, and so their families all arrived in Rome as they were coming into conclusion. Ron Howard arranged for me to take all of the department heads and their families on a tour of the Vatican. He just said, take them all. So he arranged for that. And it was, again, things were very, very different back then. And we're doing this tour. And it turns out that almost everybody involved in the production was kind of a lapsed Christian of some sort. And we got to St. Peter's. You couldn't do it today, but we could do it then. We got to St. Peter's. We're by the altar of the chair. And the parents turned to me and they said, could you tell us a little bit more? Maybe you could talk to the kids, because a lot of little kids, maybe you could talk to the kids a little bit about Christianity. And we were all piled in like the pews right by the altar of the chair, the kids on the lower pews, the parents all around this big circle, no headsets, no fast passes, no stupid stuff. We were just sitting there and we were just talking about Jesus in a little circle. And I think that's one of the greatest memories. That's like one of the greatest moments of my career ever. And, what happened with that, who knows? But it was lovely to be able to, when they first invited me to do this, I wasn't sure if I should be involved. So I called Steve McAbeedy from The Passion. I said, what should I do? And he said, you can't stop the movie from being made, but you can introduce them to a Christian who believes and who can explain what you believe. And that was the moment that Steve's advice, it was everything I needed.
Yeah. So, you've had the unique experience of meeting and showing Rob and people like Tom Hanks and now Mel Gibson, these producers, the beauty of the church from a perspective that you have that just makes it so relatable. What's your main focus when you're with them as they're producing films? Like, what's your goal in terms of showing them beauty that they might be able to replicate in the work that they do? That is something what they might learn from these figures like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, et cetera.
Well, as evidenced from the very beginning of our conversation, I am a huge movie buff. I grew up, I'm a George Lucas generation. I do everything in episodes. I grew up with those movies and the movies that you had to wait for, and that you waited all year for the next one to come out. You slept outside because you wanted to see it, and you saw it over and over and over and over and over again because that was all you had, and you relived it. So I did love film deeply, and I loved old movies and I loved new movies, but I always have a penchant for the kind of expensive blockbuster movies. Just like I do expensive blockbuster painting. It is what I am. And so I find it very easy to talk to these cinema people because Bernini and Michelangelo and Raphael, they are like them. And when Brunelleschi was first inventing one-point linear perspective in 1419, he was thinking about creating a stage so he could put the actors on the stage. The evolution from one into the other is very evident. And the storytelling, when you look at something like Bernini's Altar of the Chair in St. Peter's, which is meant to make you feel wonder, it's meant to make you. They use all of these arts. They use painting and sculpture and architecture. It's something that you could have used CGI if you did it today, but Bernini had to figure it out so that you could have that effect that makes you feel awestruck. The light comes in, you catch your breath, and so I think there is something in that which movie makers of all sorts, they want to tell stories. Many of them want, to make their audience feel awe. They want to relate to their audience, or at least they used to. And so this, I find it very, very easy to talk about art in terms of cinema with students. And I find it extremely easy to talk to movie people about art because the two dovetail so well. That's how we ended up being friends with one of the Marvel producers, just because talking about stories and film just got along. We just worked so beautifully together.
Is there a piece of art or sculpture, I guess so we can generalize it as art, right, that you most notably see that light go off in people where you bring them on tour, and whether it's a non-Christian or a Christian, and it's like you can see them come to life and realize that this piece does it for so many people. What is that piece?
It's the Pietà.
Okay.
The Pietà is a work that you can start with the simplest of building blocks. So, a 23-year-old kid looking to make a name for himself, a single block of marble, no mistakes, a Jubilee year on the horizon. And then you move to the achievement of what he does. But what he does is this sort of beauty of the human body, right? We see this very beautiful body. And from there, talking about the beauty of that body, on one hand, it comes from the study of the classical world and the articulations of an ancient statue. On the other hand, it's part of his own modern world and the empirical observations of a lifeless man, which he, with a great deal of confidence, is able to put together. And so from there, you're sort of starting by looking at the formal, and then you begin to realize that the formal is indicating something else. Then you realize that by putting these two things together, you're looking at a God who dies and you feel sorry for him, which is what the word pietà means. And then on days when you can keep pushing a little bit further, we look from Jesus to Mary and we start thinking a little bit more about the experience of Mary of Jesus's passion, and this calm that she has in the midst of what is the worst thing that can possibly happen to a mother. And these things, they all resonate with everybody. There are elements about the Pietà that are Eucharistic. That's great for Catholics, but you don't need to go there every single time. But that element, that fundamental sense of trying to bring together this ideal body and its vulnerability of its humanity, this heroicness of Mary, who never loses sight of the light, even in the darkest hour. The achievement of a young man who's looking to build a brand. I mean, this is very easy for us to understand. Like, I know I've got talent. I know I've got this thing I can do. How do I build it? How do I not have it suffocated under a bushel basket because other people make me do this, that, and the other thing? How am I going to be able to nurture that talent? So we can feel that tension as Michelangelo makes things 100 times harder for himself. And then the sort of incredible gratification that all of that effort, all of that work is for a work that is openly and evidently not only Christian, but Catholic and Eucharistic in its nature. And that's, I think that's its true function, its true purpose comes alive during the Mass. And so I think it's a work that it's perfect.
Yeah. And it's not really an art piece that was represented before Michelangelo sculpted. I mean, that image of Mary holding Jesus like that. I mean, he was really one of the first. He's
creating something as an Italian that had up to that point only been done in Germany and France, Germany and France. So he, as an Italian, is taking something that already has a kind of set iconography, which is somewhat graphic and upsetting. He's taking that and he's transforming it into something that will speak to his own world. But it turns out 500 years later, it doesn't just speak to his own world. It speaks to everybody in the world. You see that sea of faces in front of it. So, I mean, it is a reminder that this amazing story, this, white guy from Europe made something because he was making it in the context of the universal church that speaks to everybody.
What would you say is the most misrepresented or misunderstood piece of art in Rome, or we'll say Italy? Perhaps one that you came to know and heard what somebody thought it meant, and then as you've studied and grown in your own knowledge of art, you think, you know what? No, this is what the artist is really trying to say.
So I think the one of the more obvious answers is the Saint Teresa in Ecstasy, which is sort of everyone's favorite misinterpretation from Angels and Demons. I think the more insidious mischaracterization is Michelangelo's Last Judgment. So Michelangelo's in the Sistine Chapel. I think The Last Judgment is a painting that, because of its nature, because of the fact that it is a painting about judgment and accountability, will do anything to avoid talking about what it's really about. And so whether it gets reduced to a couple of anecdotes about Michelangelo didn't like that guy in the corner or put his character in his own skin, his own character in the skin of St. Bartholomew, those are all deflections. They're all forms of deflection. That painting, its greatest problematic deflection is that it's frequently interpreted as a painting that somehow is a champion of the Protestant Reformation, that it somehow reveals Michelangelo's sympathy with the Protestants. Don't really know where they're getting that. The presence of Mary right next to Jesus pretty much takes care of that there. But nonetheless, it is very common to hear people tying themselves up in the knots to talk about how this is a painting about justification through faith alone, which no. The nudity, which of course has led people to assume that this is sort of Michelangelo's sort of homosexual fantasies. So that painting has managed to be interpreted in every single way except for that of accountability for what you do. The bodies are there as a reminder. You've bodies, you do things. And what you do, you are accountable for. And you can do great things and you will be great. Or you can do bad things and you will not. And it's an amazing painting because it focuses mostly on salvation and greatness. As a matter of fact, if you look at any other Last Judgment next to it, produced from 1100 on, you will see that the Last Judgments spend a lot of time talking about the various sins you can commit and the punishments you'll get. Not Michelangelo. There's just a little section in the corner that, people are going to hell. There's only one sin that's identifiable, and it's clerical. It's simony. Nope. He is much more interested in how we can exercise heroic virtue. And that's, I think, that somehow never makes it into the discussion of that painting.
Yeah. Wow. A topic that comes up for I think the legatus sphere most often is, how do I live out my faith practically? And as you're speaking, an example that I have not shared or considered myself would be, artwork in your office. And I'm just thinking, though, about, that CEO that's the CEO of a public company. He's got shareholders, he's got to please, he can't upset people. What's that piece of artwork that you would suggest is a great way to begin a conversation, to show God's creation, be able to kind of take a non-believer to a conversation to talk about your faith? What's that piece of artwork in somebody's office that they might be able to show that begins that conversation?
I think a lot of CEOs go out and collect art with an investment mind. So Damien Hirst's famous Shark and Formaldehyde, right? So these are works that, see, whether or not they offend people, nobody seems to care. But they actually make an investment into contemporary art. And, I have this Jeff Koons, and I have this Hearst. I've got this. Why can't we do that with Catholic artists? And why can't it be a saint that you admire? Like, why can't you have an image of a saint that you admire, someone whose qualities? Why do you have this here? Well, because he was a man who was fearless. He was a man who gave his word and kept his word. And I believe that that's something that a CEO should have. And I believe sometimes it's so difficult to do that you need superhuman assistance to do it. There are stories, it doesn't even have to be, biblical stories that are overt. I mean, you can just take sort of images, whether it's those that in the Holy Land they have that. No, it's actually here in Rome in the catacomb. They have that the fish and the catacombs. I mean, I don't. I think first of all, it has to be something that you feel, something that speaks to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some cases it can be the workmanship. So the mosaics are exquisite. They're beautiful. They're like you can see the incredible amount of attention to detail. I bought this because I love the attention to detail. It can be a symbol that looks something that it can be something like a landscape with. I love landscape painting, but if you look in the distance, you see some story happening the way that they did once upon a time. But I think we do have a lot of very good artists out there, and some of them actually do works that fit in more with that slightly more abstract, slightly less sort of cookie cutter coloring book look that I can see for many people wouldn't want in their office. But I think we have a lot of really interesting people doing a lot of really interesting things. And really the same way the Medicis went and they found the Botticellis and they found the Ghirlandaio's and they found a 15-year-old Michelangelo. I think it is time to start looking to find these artists and to collaborate them and talk with them about what you want.
St. Peter is our patron of Legatus. I was hoping you could kind of talk a little bit about St. Peter and why he is emblematic of what a CEO should be, of the saint that he is, that he became through the life that he experienced with Christ, and then beyond that.
And I think the most significant thing is actually in the art of St. Peter's itself. And this would be the art and the architecture. So as you know, in St. Peter's Basilica, the tomb of St. Peter it was placed on a hillside and the basilica is built on top of his tomb. There are a series of altars, and those are the papal altars. So there's one on top of the other, and the altar on the top is where the Pope celebrates Mass. Now, Michelangelo, when he was 72 years old, began work on the cupola that goes above it, the dome above it, and he made the dome in a very sort of striking way, where instead of having this hemispherical dome that would be very close to the body of the building, he lifted the dome up on a drum, on a cylinder with these very, very big windows. And those windows, they let in a lot of light. So you understand that the dome up above is heaven, and then you have down below the actual dirt, the ground where Peter's body is buried. When the Pope, who is the successor of St. Peter, celebrates Mass in St. Peter's, he stands in the altar where he is standing above the tomb of St. Peter and underneath this position of heaven. And so we use this term for the Pope, Pontifex Maximus. We use it all the time. What it means is the great bridge builder. And it shows the Pope as this great bridge between heaven and earth. But you can also extend that Pontifex Maximus also to the idea of the legatus, the connector, the tie between heaven and earth. And that, again, helps us understand in the person of Peter, and then in the person of his successors, it is about bringing people to the Lord, being a connection or a legate or an ambassador to the Lord, which then in turn is an excellent message for your CEOs.
This past year, we celebrated the Jubilee in Rome, and I know you've written a lot about the idea of a tourist becoming a pilgrim. It's a very different things, and I think that's one of the things I value a lot with Legatus is going on pilgrimage and taking members, because they can obviously, go anywhere and everywhere they want. But the importance of going to these historical places to see the beauty of the church, the history. Why was that so important to you to kind of draw those lines from being a tourist to being a pilgrim?
Well, a tourist is the tourist, the grand tourist. I suppose we're here for educational reasons, but tourism, it's going someplace. And going someplace for what? And as the years go by and traveling becomes much, much easier, what are you doing? Why are you going to this new place? And often people go to places to be someone they don't want to be at home, and you wouldn't want to deal with those people they are at home. Whereas there is another element of being a tourist and being away from home and being able to experiment with someone who is more prayerful, someone who is more thoughtful, someone who doesn't always have to be first, someone who doesn't have to prove anything. There is something about that sense of being away from your usual environment that can better us. So the idea of the difference between tourist to pilgrim, which was the podcast that we did with Dicastery of Communications, really to help people who are coming just thinking, I'm going to take a picture and post it, or I'll do a selfie in front of it, as opposed to what it means to really interact with these sacred sites and sacred spaces and allow them to change you. In the case of the Legatus pilgrimages, which, thank you, I have been so fortunate to be a part of.
Well,
so
we have
many
been the
times.
fortunate ones.
It's a great honor and a delight. One of the things I think is interesting about it is that indeed you have extremely successful people who are perfectly capable of traveling on their own and doing their own thing, and the fact that your pilgrimages keep you together as a community, and you do things together and you experience things together. When I first started doing sort of what people would describe as high-end touring, I did a lot of work for YPO, and I know that Legatus grows out of that YPO. And the YPO is just, experience bragging rights, no offense, but there it is. To see this evolution of bringing these people together for networking, for getting to know each other, but to really sort of create a community by bringing these people together and focusing them at the tomb of St. Peter, at the tomb of St. Paul, at the relics of the crib at St. Mary Major. I mean, it's a very, very beautiful thing. And I think, I know you go to the Holy Land a great deal as well. And so I think the pilgrimage really is part of a grounding that reminds people who, because of your success, you don't really have to deal with other people.
Yeah.
But you kind of come back together, you experience together, you share with each other, and then you're ready to go out and to share more effectively with the world.
Yeah. So you're a mother with three kids, right? What's your advice to parents? I can only imagine when you're walking the streets of Rome and you see tourists and all they have are their phones in front of them, and they're kind of just going through that whole kind of clickbait mentality of like, oh, what can I post that's going to get Instagram followers or whatever? How do you, as a mom, get your kids to like put the phone down and like take in the beauty that's right in front of you, whether it's in New York City or in Rome or whatever? I can only imagine, knowing you the way I do, like that just has to grind your every being. So
it is. I am older. I'm a grandma now, and my kids were raised before the era of the cell phone. So my kids are the ones who look at the other kids in horror. And instead, I look at my grandchildren. I look at my children with their grandchildren, and the temptation of the screen as a device to keep them quiet, keep them amused. When my kids were small, we would have dinner at in these Italian restaurants. You know how it takes forever to get the bill? It was worse then. So you'd be sitting there, the kids would get getting antsy. And I used to start telling them stories of the Greek myths. My kids are all experts on Greek mythology, because we would sit there at dinner and so we'd be waiting for well, did I ever tell you about the wrath of Achilles?
Oh, here we go again with another one of Mom's stories.
They loved those stories. And but I think storytelling with kids is and also just giving them things to stimulate them to use their eyes around them. I've taken a lot of tours with families who were bringing their children over really with a grand tour mentality. They really wanted their children to get sort of out of this sort of bubble of the United States and be someplace else and have contact with another language and another culture. And having them be aware of, look at, talk about differences and things that they notice and try to find them. I think those are all really useful. But it's meant to be a family activity. I mean, if we're going with just do something to get the kids out of my hair, then that's never going to work. Yeah. It really does involve parents really settling in and deciding to have the family experience with the family.
Well, I shared the experience this most recent time in Rome where there was a kid just in St. Mary Major just sitting on a pew with the phone in front of him playing on it. And I thought, the opportunity that the parents are missing, the kids missing. And I'm not perfect at this either, because I know, it's much easier to have my, a phone babysit my kid. And that's basically what we're doing
Right.
here. But we're really malforming them,
Yes.
when we do that.
The times I've taken my students to see the Pietà, and we'll get lucky and there's no one in front of the Pietà. So we're standing in front of the Pietà, I'm talking about it, and they're all sitting there leaning against the, like we're going to stop now. You're going to turn around and look at it. And I do that a lot, actually, to people on tours. If I see kids that are just kind of saying, I'm like, your parents paid a lot to get you here, so why don't we just stop and look at it for a second? They don't like it when I do that, but parents do. But I mean, I will actually intervene, and I've seen these really tragic situations where they bring these school kids around to try to give them some sort of dusting of culture, but the kids, they just find like the first place they can sit in the corner, and they whip out their phones, and now that is, not just their fault. It's the fault of people who just think that you just bring them in front of it. Like, think about how to make this interesting for them. And so I do. Which
is what you do so well, is bring it to real life.
Thank you.
Should workplaces be beautiful, and how might beauty surrounding us really help inspire us to do better work?
It's a super interesting question. My workplace is beautiful, so that I'm a big fan. But sometimes a workplace can be overly beautiful. We have the decoration, the Salone Sistine of the Vatican Library. I'm like, how does anybody get any work done in here with all this stuff going on? I do think a little attention to the aesthetics of the workplace matter. If you put, someone in a dank, dark room, and already they have to be there because they have to work. Yeah. I think it creates an adversarial situation. I think, yes, it doesn't creating a workspace that is sort of the museum space, no, but being careful and attentive to making a space pleasant. Back in the day before we had the work at home, people spent 8 hours of their lives at the place of work. It's right and fitting that that space be pleasant. However, not everybody has the luxury of doing that, and the people who do, I think, should remember that. I remember every day that my worst day is taking place in the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody else's worst day is taking place someplace a lot less attractive.
Right. Well, and I think of our founder, Tom Monahan, who has always been a big proponent of how you dress. And I think in the very same way, how you dress is how you behave at the office and when you're working and you're called to a higher being. The same way when you're in a church. Just like when you go to a church, when you go to Mass at St. Peter's versus going to Mass at, we'll say a 70s type of church, you're not going to have the same level of respect and drawn to heaven the way that churches are supposed to if you don't surround yourself with that. And so I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.